I'm going to just begin. Let's go the fairly big question. How do you think Ireland played?
Far from the best.
Yeah.
I think any Irish fan would have expected slightly more from that. I think the way that, it's kind of ironic, the way that they finished the game is probably how a lot of people expected it would start.
Yeah.
Where they were creating a lot of opportunities but not quite finishing them. Whereas in the first half, it was weird because their attack looked quite good, but they weren't making clean line breaks. They were just making good gain line carries. How about you? What do you think?
So I put this on Blue Sky at halftime, and this is kind of how I felt. I was trying to work out all half what game this reminded me of, because I was like, the vibes are identical to something, and I can't quite place it. Then I worked out it was when Georgia beat Wales in 2022. And it just had that vibe of like, they're ahead, and they've had some good passages, but none of the good passages are the ones that worked out. Then they've had kind of like, the Crowley try was well worked, but like the Timoney try was kind of a fluke. Like that attack was going nowhere, and then just Timoney pops up on a line and happens to go through, and one of those moments where like almost play stopped for a moment because it looked like, it was almost a play to the whistle kind of moment. And it just kind of felt like Ireland had got into the lead by default, and they weren't playing particularly well, and Japan weren't playing particularly well either.
Yeah.
And yet, it wasn't like they were turning up and really performing. But you kind of felt that same thing that happened with Georgia against Wales, where Georgia were bad in the first half. And then second half, they're like, hold on, Wales is shit. Like, if we just turn our heads on here, we can win this. And they played well for the last 20 minutes and suddenly won the game from there for like 20, 25 minutes of effort. And I kind of felt that. And obviously, I didn't expect Japan to win this, but you kind of had a moment of going like, oh, this is much more likely to happen than I thought might. Because Ireland started to look really disgruntled and really frustrated. And this is a thing I worried about going into this autumn from an Irish perspective, which is that the narrative around Ireland has been, for a long time you've had the like, Andy Farrell won't pick these players and so on, this kind of growing dissent from a lot of non-Leinster fans about this Irish system. And the moment that suddenly they weren't winning, those voices grew louder and more people joined in and went, actually, is this an issue? And then you look at the age of the squad and how you are seeing players start to have dips in form and slowing down, and post lines and so on, players are understandably knackered. Leinster's form this season then adds into that. And so the narrative around Ireland has grown to be pretty negative, despite the fact that they have been on a pretty good run of form until that All Blacks game, right? Like, they lost one game all year, which was to France, and they were ahead, on 50 odd minutes. So that isn't a catastrophe by any stretch, but you felt that there was a kind of negative energy around Ireland, and a lot of that was like kind of, I think a bit of it's like self-fulfilling prophecy, of people being like, this is going to be a problem at some stage, like Andy Farrell's going to be a problem at some stage, and now it has become that. And I feel like that energy around like the national team and that setup and kind of, rugby in Ireland, particularly around Andy Farrell and his team, has kind of manifested itself into the team a little bit.
I get that.
And I think like there's a little bit, the players hearing this like, oh, we're much worse than we seem to be from the games we're winning. And that first half, like they looked sloppy and they looked like the team I think people had been pinning them as being over the Six Nations, but really that the last half hour of that France game and chunks of the Wales game were the only time you were like, actually they're below the level they should be, you know? And I feel like they've gradually like, and it can be a one-off fluke game. I don't mean to, like, I know I'm very guilty of reading too much into things at all times, but I don't know, I think these last 2 weeks, it's felt a little bit like the wheels are coming off, and I don't think it's that worrying. I don't think
I think that's
I don't
a bit
mean to make
harsh.
Wales as a comparison, but it's felt like, not like the wheels are coming off, but the wheels are kind of loose, like things have felt very bumpy consistently.
I know what you mean, because I think the age profile thing it's not an immediate concern, but it will be at some point. But obviously they have enough players.
Player they brought in was 32.
They have enough players coming through that they'll be able to patch that up in a bit of time. I don't think it'll be like.
I know. I'm not saying it's to be a Wales level situation.
But I think the important place to start is contextualising Japan.
Yes.
And the performance they put in. Because I agree with you. I didn't look at this Japan performance and go, oh, it was one of those like brilliant destiny, spirited performances to put a world-class team to the sword. I don't think it was that. There were some really great bits to it and some really entertaining bits to it. Japan played in the first 20 minutes really, really fast, and they got so many passes into every attack that they did. And that's great. They're constantly changing the point of attack. If you can keep that up for 80 minutes, it's an incredibly frustrating and tiring thing to defend against, because you've constantly got your head in a swivel. Anything can change at any moment. The difficulty is they couldn't sustain it for more than about 25 minutes-ish. They had Naoto Saito playing 9 for them, Toulouse scrum half, a brilliant 9. I thought played really well, was really, really quick. he occasionally has this habit of acting too fast for his brain.
Yes.
Where he will make a decision before his brain has thought through whether it's a good thing or not. And so that's a little bit of a concern, a little bit of a Saito, but I do think that's what you expect from a scrum-half like him, that you kind of sign up knowing he will have the odd brain fart, but he will make your attack run a lot faster. So I thought he generally played really well with the odd, like, really stupid error that would creep in there as well. Tomoki Asada on the wing I thought was absolutely outstanding.
Excellent, really
He's such a good player. So much fun. That whole back three with Yazaki and Ishida as well. Like, all three of those are brilliant to watch. Granted, they're not as powerful or big defensively as a lot of back threes in the world, or good on the kick chase necessarily, but with ball in hand, which is how Japan like to play, or even when it's little kicks in behind, those three are all brilliant.
I was really intrigued by a few times we saw Crowley and Ireland launch kick battles and want to go back and forth for long periods, and Japan never went beyond 2 kicks.
No.
They always ran it back. They always got in a position where they felt comfortable doing that. And even if they weren't going to make it in the opposition half from that counter-attack, they were happy to do it and happy to go with it because they want to play ball in hand and they want to keep that, high phase count going. And I think it's intriguing. We've got 2 teams who both pass the ball a lot.
Yeah.
But they play so in different styles completely, where Japan want to get from one touchline to the next, right? They go width to width, they want to get outside you. And there's a few passages where they did that really nicely, and they have to construct that, and using these kind of like very flat pods, which I thought was intriguing.
Yeah.
Of like really flat pods, and it allows someone to kind of float out the back, and
It's quite positionless as well.
Yeah.
Them getting the likes of Yazaki running hard lines and Charlie Lawrence running hard lines.
Yeah.
Like, I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I thought their attack was really interesting. I think it's kind of built from where it was a few months ago, like versus the summer when they're playing against Wales, and certainly versus last year. I think they've started to develop over these last 3 games against Australia, South Africa, and Ireland.
Yeah.
And we'll see, obviously, the building into this game against Wales, which is their big game for the year.
Yeah.
With ranking points and so on.
Winner takes all in a way.
Yeah, the loser of that game will drop down to 3rd ranking for the World Cup seedings, so it's huge.
And would need a big upset in the remainder of their autumn
Yes.
to keep that hope alive, which is highly unlikely.
Yeah.
So those two are quite evenly matched, Wales and Japan.
Yeah. I think this is a decent Japanese team.
Yeah.
And I think, as I said last week, I think they are building something that I can see working.
Yeah.
I can see causing upsets, but I don't think it's there yet. And I think they need more time with it, and they need players to get more used to it.
Yeah.
And I'm also increasingly wondering this, right? Do Japan need to go 7-1 and just have a scrum half forwards?
Maybe.
Because their pack looked knackered after about 50 minutes.
The other thing is, their pack aren't very big.
No.
And, like, they play an extremely fast brand of rugby, but when you come up against a pack like Ireland's or the Springboks last week, they just about managed to cope trying to keep up with Australia. But and even then it was a slightly depleted Australia. They don't have, other than Warner Dearns really, they don't really have a big ball carrier. I know that they've got McKessie at number 8, who's a big unit, but he's not as fast or dynamic.
He carries very upright as well.
Yeah.
So he's always looking for the offload and so on. And sometimes you need someone who will get you go forward rather than create continuity.
And I don't think they have as many players who are just physically big and strong enough compared to somebody like an Ireland or a South Africa.
Leach comes back in, that adds something.
Yeah,
of
course.
He comes off the bench. If Himeno comes back in, that adds something. They've got a few options who can be dropped in here, but I think it is a bit of a problem. They need a couple of extra ball carriers to be in there. In the other positions, they need probably another, 6 or lock who's a big carrier who will make them like 2 or 3 yards over the game line, and a front rower who will do it.
And that's it. I love Takeuchi, but if he had somebody next to him who was like Taniela Tupou sized, or Will Skelton sized, that would honestly make such a difference.
Takeuchi has a great turn of pace and makes the odd break and gets into space and he does something with it, right? So you think of him as a dynamic carrying prop, but he actually, if you look at him carrying into contact, he doesn't make a lot of yardage. This is the Japanese tight head prop, I realise, we should probably add that context. But he doesn't make that much yardage on a straight carry, so it becomes difficult if you build off that. And I thought Caelan Doris was absolutely outstanding. I thought he was the best player on the pitch by a country mile.
Collision dominance both sides of the ball every single time.
That's it. There's a few times Japan got going and he just got an immediate bam, no. Knock them back, running into a brick wall.
It's the way he lifts people when he's tackling them. And he's got so much core strength. It's such a hard skill.
To say he was playing against Michael Leach, it felt like a Michael Leach, Jack Morgan, Sergio Parise, talismanic, I am the best player on my team by a country mile performance, despite the fact that Ireland team are as good as they are. That's how good I think Caelan Doris is. And the last 2 weeks, it looks like he's gone up a gear while he was injured. He looks even better than he was before. And he was already one of the best players in the world. So I can't speak highly enough of how good Caelan Doris was in the game. I thought he was I thought it was like every other player on the pitch, and then he was like way up.
I think, yeah, he was the player of the match for sure.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have anyone close to him. I don't think like TNT Sport have been doing this, bringing up the contenders. I don't think there was a contender. I think the contenders should have just been Kalen Doris.
Yeah.
And it should have been done there.
Yeah, I like them putting Warner Dearns on there. Though,
Yeah, I thought
like,
Warner Dearns had a good game.
he's such a good player.
Yeah.
And again, he's a big unit. He is really quick as well.
Yeah.
And Japan need more players like him in
Yeah.
the pack.
But
yeah, no, that's just the one thing is that Ireland in that first half, the thing is, I can't tell if the attack just looked good because they had better and bigger and more powerful players, and that was who were quicker into position. That might have just been a part of it.
I think another thing is Ireland had, in a way they didn't in 2019, they learnt a lesson and they did the homework. And you look at like this passage, Japan go to run their kind of trademark 11 pattern, and Ireland are waiting for it. Their line speed is being led primarily on the blind side, not the open side, because they left all the forwards in place because they know how often Japan run 11 patterns, where they go one phase in field, get a game line carry, and then go back to the blind side and try to hit up because teams are less likely to leave their players there. And Ireland did it regardless. And they just looked incredibly well drilled on what threats Japan bring. And those midfield carries they focus on stopping. Like occasionally Japan would make yards down the touchlines, but so often they just left the likes of Kalen Doris and they had, just picked two big centres who are good hitters of the ball, hitters of, men, of bodies, left them in the middle of the pitch and just went, bam, no, we'll stop your momentum in the middle and then hopefully you won't be able to get to the wings on those phases when you're playing into midfield and then working wider. And I just thought they did the homework really nicely. Absolutely. And the other side of this, right, is high phase count. Ireland kicked less the ball than I think they perhaps should have, and I think you can ask that question of kind of Jack Crowley over the first 60 minutes of whether he was kicking enough ball. I thought he generally played well and generally managed the attack well.
Yeah, I agree.
I question whether he could have kicked more ball. But also, you've got to bring this in that those players, right, that play this incredibly demanding high-speed game plan with Japan, they've got to attack and defend.
Yeah.
If NFL style, they could roll players on to only attack and then roll them back off to defend. I think this Japan team could be causing upsets left, right and centre.
Especially when you consider the fact that like, at lineouts, they always chuck it in straight away.
Yeah.
They do not wait around.
Yeah.
And that's great because that's the way they want to play.
Yeah.
They want to try and tire the opposition out. But in a way, they're only tiring themselves out because the oppositions have been fitter than them. It's awesome so far. And granted, I think that's Eddie Jones doing his thing and go, well, if we force our players to do this now, they will have to acclimatise.
Yeah.
They will have to learn to keep up and actually become fitter. I think it's a little bit, he's kind of manifesting this style of play by making them play it.
I think that's massively happening. But if you're then forcing those players to make 20 tackles in a set, and then they give away a penalty at the end because they're stressed and tired, and then you force them to make 20 more tackles, that does slow down their attack as you get into the second half. And Japan were not the same in attack over the last 25 minutes. And they haven't been any game they played under Eddie Jones, right? Even when they've had a really good start to the game, they've generally died off in the latter stages. The only game they held out was that first test against Wales, where they obviously came back into it, where they started quite poorly. And they haven't managed to put together two consecutive halves in any game they've played at all under Eddie Jones since he came back in.
So I watched this game on a delay,
Yeah.
having avoided the score, not knowing what the score was because I was playing whilst this game was going on. And there was a point where I said to you, I think Jack Crowley's been excellent. And you'd seen the end of the game.
Yeah.
I hadn't yet. And you kind of agreed, but in a way that said to me, yeah, but he could be a little bit better. It's not perfect. And it was really interesting because watching it back, like, I think Jack Crowley did play really well. I think he was brilliant. I think he called all the right attacking shapes. And the Ireland attack looked good, but it didn't penetrate and score as many points as necessarily it should. I think, again, it looked good because they weren't dropping the ball and they were going through lots of high phase counts, rather than because they were making clean breaks. And it was quite interesting. As you said, you mentioned there, Jack Crowley didn't kick the ball very much, which is fine because, again, that's the way he likes to play.
As I said, like that helped to break down Japan.
Yeah, he likes to soften the defence up by making them tackle his team a lot. And he's brilliant at this for Munster in terms of bringing players onto the ball and just being a membrane for the pack that are around him. I think he's so good at this. I think he did it brilliantly. Yeah. For example, I mean, the try he scored, which comes from him orchestrating his forwards, and to the point where everyone was on the same level. Andrew Porter literally points at Kalen Doris when Craig Casey has the ball, saying pass the ball to him so he can lift it to Crowley on the outside. I think there's so many moments like that where he just is the kind of orchestrator behind this pack, and I think he did a brilliant job. Obviously, on the kicking thing, I think a big part of that is Craig Casey did most of the kicking when the two of them were on those halfbacks, and they were mostly contestables. And they were good ones, but Ireland, unfortunately, just dropped the ball a lot of the time, so they couldn't really get on the front foot through their kicking game.
But I'm intrigued by okay, there's this moment here where Andrew Porter just puts the ball behind Jack Crowley. They're just going for a very simple in the boot play. The timing isn't right at all. And I don't know whether you pin that on Crowley didn't get it in time, whether Porter's throwing a shit pass, or whether it's just I think there's a little bit of all of it. But there was just something really disjointed in the play.
Yeah.
And it just felt like a lot of the time they were calling what looked like the right shapes and they looked like they were getting their time, then one pass wouldn't be quite right. And you don't know where to pin that. You don't know where to put that on. And they did very little to try and fix that. It kind of, there was no we'll tighten up or we'll kick more or whatever. And we'll just try and ride it out and bore Japan a bit and squeeze them out because their pack was so on top for most of the game. Obviously not necessarily obviously the maul went well for Japan and stuff, but physically in contact, Ireland were getting game line pretty much every carry. Craig Casey had a kind of, I'd say a pretty typical performance of him.
Yeah.
Where he was very good, but had a couple big brain farts in there.
Yeah.
A couple of moments where he kind
Similar
of backed
to
himself
Saito,
to do
really.
something. Yeah. And that very much wasn't on. And you kind of be like, why are you running into touch there? What are you doing?
But he's always fun to watch.
He's
Craig
always fun to
Casey,
watch. He's
isn't
always
he?
fun to watch.
I really like
and he's
him.
more fun for the fact that every now and again he runs up a blind alley and you're like,
Absolutely.
why are you going up there?
Look, as a scrum half, it's empowering that he does this shit.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt a little bit like there was no real stamp on the game, and that's a bullshit criticism that means nothing.
Yeah.
Right? And I was kind of like, what they need is the Jack Crowley that turns up for Munster against the Stormers or something, and the game will be tight, the game will be close, and in the last half hour, Jack Crowley turns up, kicks the lever off it, and wins them the game, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, this game was crying out for Crowley to do that, and it was almost like if you had put a Ross Byrne mask on Jack Crowley, right? I would have spent the entire game going why isn't Crowley on the pitch? Get Crowley on now. And instead, you're like, oh, that guy is Jack Crowley already, right? I was like, he played well, but I was a bit like, oh, but I wanted him to put a different Jack Crowley performance
I know
in,
what you mean, because Jack Crowley...
And it's a bullshit thing to say.
I know what you mean.
I get it.
I think Jack Crowley's been the form player in the ORC this season. He has been absolutely
Harry Dave's erasure, but
that is true. That is true.
I think he's been brilliant. And he is the Island 10 at the minute, right?
He
There
is.
isn't much debate over
He
that.
is. And we are both big fans of Sam Prendergast
Yeah.
as a player. I think if you've got two great 10s, use them both.
Yeah.
That's what you want. It would be pointless to put all of your chips on Prendergast when you've got Crowley playing as well as he has. And at the same time, when you've got a kid as good as Sam Prendergast, you don't want to leave him off for 80 minutes.
Yeah.
And with all of this in mind, there's a part of me that thinks no matter how well either of them play for the next 12 months, because of all of the media pressure and the bullying that Sam Prendergast has faced in the last 12 months, I would keep Crowley as the starting 10 for Ireland for 12 months, just to allow Prendergast to focus on his own game with Leinster, just to stop, because in a way, we discussed this at the end of the Lions tour, but the best thing that could have happened for Sam Prendergast was not going on that Lions tour, to not allow the other three nations to get in on this whole, Prendergast bullying train, I guess.
Just allow people to forget about him for a bit.
Yeah.
I made this point during that Munster-Leinster game on the rest of the internet, and Sam Prendergast is an incredibly fun player to watch.
He's great.
And he throws these balls that very few other players can throw. There was a couple of them in this game where he was just outstanding.
Yeah.
And he was really good when he came on.
Yeah.
And obviously against a Thai Japanese team, so blah-de-blah-de-blah.
And credit goes to Crowley for the fact that he managed to soak
soften
up
them
the
up.
Japanese team. Yeah.
But, right, if Sam Prendergast was coming through at any club other than Leinster, Toulouse, or maybe Saracens, maybe Saracens or Bath, he would be treated as, look at this fun kid. Isn't he great? We love watching him.
Yeah.
And he'd pick up the odd cap here and there. But because he's part of this Leinster system where he has been chosen as you are the boy, you shall lead us onwards. And you hear all these rumours about how, he almost went to Connacht or whatever, and then, but Andy Farrell and the RFU wanted him at Leinster, so he's learning, whatever. You hear all of these rumours, you hear all of these bits and pieces, and it builds him up to being he is the figurehead of the one team, the only team, possibly other than the Crusaders in the world, right, where not winning the biggest competition they play in is a failure of the season.
Yeah.
If Leinster don't win big Europe every year, their season is a failure at the minute, right? And Prendergast is coming through with that pressure on his shoulders. If he was coming through at Connacht or Scarlets or, even Northampton or something, right? He was being treated properly as here's a really talented, fun kid who needs to learn his game management. And we saw Marcus Smith did this over the last few years, right? And he came through as a really fun, exciting player. At Quins, so we went, brilliant, we've got a young, exciting player. And then he learned his game management as he went on.
Yeah.
You look at, Prendergast is better than Dan Edwards at the minute, right? But Dan
Miles
Edwards has been
better.
talked about really positively because he's coming for a mid-table club
So true.
where that is the expectation.
Just think-
And Sam Prendergast should be treated as such, like, except for the fact he's coming for a club where there's way too much pressure on him. And now for a national team where he's being pitted in this kind of like, you know, and like, I think this the Prendergast Crowley thing captures people's imagination because it's not just like two tens, right? It's two tens that represent complete different sides of what Irish rugby can be.
It's because we were living in a post-Sexton v O'Gara world where those two really hated each other.
Yeah.
Whereas it seems like these two lads actually get on really well. But nobody, like when you're watching Bordeaux play and you're watching Mathieu Jalibert doing all of his chip kicks and all of his stuff, you look at him and you go like, I love Jalibert. He's so much fun, isn't he? You don't go, oh, but he's not Untomax, so he must be shit.
Lots of French people do.
Yeah,
but
sure.
But
as a neutral supporter, you don't do that.
The other point in this, right, is that we've spent most of this talking about the 10, and the thing is, I think like any issues with Ireland are not really the 10 debate.
No.
They've got two really good 10s.
Yeah.
And the issues are
It's a
aging
positive.
squad, and I think people are working it out, right?
Yeah.
And we talked last week about the All Blacks and how the All Blacks have worked out how you defend them. I think Japan, for large stretches, knew how to defend them. And obviously they're then tired in that, and they physically couldn't keep with the kind of collision dominance it requires. But there is a sign growing that pretty much everyone has worked out how this Andy Farrell team plays. And I still think they're good enough that they will beat most teams and they will outlast most teams because they're fit enough and they've got enough good players. But we might not see them be dominant over full 80 minutes as they have been in the past.
And obviously the playbook is finite, but I want to just quickly highlight one moment towards the end. I mean, another thing about Prendergast's performance is I loved how much he varied, whether they play off him or he goes into the boot of Robbie Henshaw or Tom Farrell as the centres. I really liked that. I think that was something where he could weigh up how much time do I need on the ball to execute that pass and how deep do I need to be, because he likes to be really flat to the line, which is great. It means that he can zip it past people and they're already in gaps. But at the same time, players can swarm him and come around him, whereas this was a bit more mature because he could instead go, right, no, I need an extra second to weigh up this pass and be more realistic if he needs to chuck it over somebody's head. And that way he can get into the boot of Tom Farrell, who can look after him and take the front line hit a little bit instead. But this shape I thought was absolutely lovely. So they do our first phase off a line out. They have Caelan Blade go into the 10 channel, and they have then a carrying pod of just Jack Conan and Robbie Henshaw. Robbie Henshaw then zips it out the back to Tom Farrell, who is not in the boot, because you see Prendergast here, he is in the boot. But instead, Henshaw just zips it straight across to the next pod, which means Prendergast can then come into the boot of this second pod. So at this point, when Prendergast, the fly half, is taking the ball, they're already 2/3 of the way across the pitch, with Jamie O'Brien running at hardline to protect his 10 in the boot. And then he sends one pass across. Jacob Stock doesn't loads of space, makes the break. They're quite unlucky not to score off this. Caelan Blade runs a really nice support line here. The ball ends up going forward. It's unfortunate. And I don't know, I just really liked the way that, as I say, it's a really nice axis, having Crowley there to make the opposition defend high phase count, constantly make tackles, and then you bring on somebody who has that unpredictability, who is less of a game manager than Crowley is, but is somebody who can zip the ball miles across the pitch because his wrists are golden. Say what you want about the rest of his game, like the lad can't tackle, sure, but his wrists are absolutely beautiful.
He's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask you one separate, unrelated question about Ireland?
Yes, I love those.
Why is their line-out so bad?
Yeah, that was a real red flag.
What's going on?
They've got Ty Byrne, man.
Their line-out's like...
And James Ryan.
Their line-out's always been excellent.
Yep.
Why is it so bad right now?
I don't know.
Like, it was bad against the All Blacks. It was even worse here. And, like, Ronan Keller had a few, like, bad throws and did a dummy throw at one point that cost them big. But then the lineup just generally was just like an absolute farce.
You would think bringing in sort of like Nick Timoney would help that.
Yeah.
And bringing on like Kean Prendergast from the bench.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It didn't work.
I can't work it out. It's just fallen apart
Against Japan
completely.
as well, who aren't known to be great at line-out. Although that said, the Wallabies line-out also didn't function against Japan a couple of weeks ago. So maybe there's something in this.
Maybe they're quietly much better than we think.
Maybe one of Dearns is shouting piss at the thrower or something to really put them off. I don't know.
Think that would do it for me.
Yeah.
If Warner Dern shouted piss at me, I would piss.
Yeah, and not throw a ball straight.
No. Right. Any other reflections on Ireland?
Yeah, not really. Just as I say, like they softened them up as they went along, and the attack wasn't, for most of the game, it wasn't making clean breaks, but it wasn't bad.
Yeah.
So from an Irish perspective, a lot of fans will be frustrated with this, and I completely understand that because you want to be entertained for 80 minutes and watch your team play well. At the same time, I wouldn't deep it too much personally if I was an Ireland fan, because they got there in the end and they did soften them up. And I think that again, that axis of the 2 10s and also the 2 9s, look, Caelan Blade was excellent when he came
Yeah,
on.
he was.
I don't know. I think the attack didn't look bad. It took a while to get going. And I think there is a lot of promise in there, as much as it may have been frustrating because Japan didn't play a 10 out of 10 game.
I think they kind of just need to forget about this game.
Yeah.
I think it kind of, I know we obviously talk about it for half an hour, but I think you kind of just need to move on and go like, okay, that was what it was. Put it to bed. Australia next week, and hope to beat Australia, right? This Ireland team should be beating most teams like that, but Australia's really interesting because Australia and Argentina are right on the cusp of the teams they should be beating, right? Of like, they're the best teams that we should be beating comfortably. And last year, Argentina almost beat them in the final play. And Australia now, really intrigued by how they can push them.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, like again, the last few games between Ireland and Australia have been like deceptively much closer than you'd expect them to be. So if this is like Joe Schmidt's big last hurrah, they've just almost lost to Japan, they have lost to Italy, they have lost to England, is this the performance to send Joe Schmidt out on?
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Harry Wilson and Bobby V versus
Yes.
Caelan Doris and Jack Conan.
That's pretty good.
It's tasty, isn't
Pretty
it?
good. Unstoppable force meets a movable object.
Indeed.
A movable force stops an object. I've lost track of what I'm saying. We should talk about rugby less.